Hi, and welcome to Liftoff, a podcast focused on early talent, career launch, and the new world of work. I'm Saima Siddiqui, the CEO and co-founder of Grad Greenhouse. I'm really pleased to be joined in conversation today by Rosaline Chow Koo, founder and CEO of CXA Group. Welcome, Rosaline. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
It's great to have you. Rosalind, anyone who's followed you even a little bit knows you have an amazing backstory. So I'd love it if you could start us off by telling us a little about your personal history and your journey.
Okay. I'm about to be 60, so I've been working for 33 years. I have two kids. One is 26 and one is 24. They're both in the US right now after attending college. So I was the first person in my family that went to college. My father was an illegal immigrant who hid in San Francisco Chinatown for 40 years. My mother left two daughters behind during the Communist Revolution, met my dad and married him and moved to the U.S., but never told him she had two daughters, not until my younger brothers were born. So I went to college at UCLA, studied cybernetics, only because I babysat for an engineer. And that was the first nice house I've ever seen in my life. After college, I moved from Los Angeles to Iowa to work for Procter and Gamble. Stayed there for 2 years. Went to Columbia for business school in New York City. And I took a summer internship and then stayed for 8 years for Bankers Trust Company, where I did 8 jobs in 8 years. In the 8th year, my husband got a job in London, so I convinced the bank to move me to the London office. But the day the movers came to pick up our furniture, his company called them and said, "No, not London, Singapore." I had bought a lot of winter clothes for my 1-year-old because I heard London was really expensive. We had a lease for an apartment in London. I had to call my job and tell them I wasn't coming. And so we diverted the furniture to Singapore. And that was in 1996. In 1999, during the dot-com, one of my friends had started a startup, asked me for an investment. So I sold all my Bankers Trust shares and invested in his company. I went to visit him in KL to see how the company was doing and decided to stay to help launch the
Oh,
company.
wow. So
So we
what
did.
inspired you to do that? I mean, that was you took to take that leap. I mean, Bankers Trust, P&G, those are big corporations with a lot of stability. And then all of a sudden you took this leap of faith.
Yeah, I discovered he was really good at sales, but not good at running the day to day.
Mm.
So to protect my money, I decided I will launch you. A big startup found me, Bain Capital found me and said, "Hey, how would you like to launch a really giant startup?" So I moved there and launched them too. But one day when I came home over the weekend, I was commuting every Monday morning, coming home Friday nights. I discovered that my daughter had epilepsy and a learning disorder, so I quit because you can imagine the guilt of a mom, right? Commuting to KL and coming home weekends when my own baby was sick. So I discovered that the epilepsy was triggered by sleep deprivation because both her parents were running these regional roles where we were traveling, and it was my mom. I moved her from Los Angeles to stay with my daughter. So we had her diagnosed. She didn't go on drugs, and I put her in a special needs program, and I also put my son there. And so one of my ex-clients from my startup came and said, "Aren't you bored when your kids are in school?" And I said, "Yes, you're right. I didn't even know." So they said, "Why don't you work for us when your kids are at school?" And I said, okay, fine, it's just a project because they wanted me to start an e-business.
That's how it always starts
And
off, just a
I
project, right?
know you say yes, and then you have to live the
Yes.
consequences. So 6 weeks later, they said, hey, why don't you run Singapore?
God.
And then I started running Southeast Asia, working full time. I started a business for them where I didn't want to pay brokers. I was working for an insurance company. And so the largest broker hired me because I took 200 of their clients and I was the enemy. And so they told me, no travel, just 4 countries. Well, it was 14 countries. And so they had not grown for 30 years. And my job was to build it into hyper growth. So that's what we did. We grew 800%. But even though we grew so much, all the clients complained about the industry. And so I figured out how to fix it with tech because I was in tech before. And for 5 years, I begged them to give me $10 million to fix these issues, but I never got the 10 million. So when my boss got fired and the CEO got fired, my two sponsors, I knew I was next. So I quit. But little did I realize that I would spend $10 million myself building CXA. So that's been my journey. It's been an accidental journey.
So a lot of it, I mean, a lot of what you describe is a lot of a really high appetite for risk. You
Yes,
were
yes.
you were willing to sort of take things on and like see opportunities to build something or create something or solve a problem or fill a gap, and you jumped at it. What would you say were, I mean, some of your your childhood you've talked about. What characteristics do you think you have or experiences that kind of built that in you, that you have this appetite and this sort of steeliness that allows you to persevere?
Yeah. I think it's both my childhood of being able to overcome, being bullied and not speaking English and making your way, right, to get to college. Watching my mom, right, work 2 jobs because my dad was taking care of the kids since he was so much older. And, watching her survive, right? And also, my first job when I moved to Iowa, when I on the first day of work, discover I was the first Asian and I had to manage 33 people and I was 21.
Wow. So were you still
And
in
it
undergrad
was,
at that stage? Were you in college?
yeah, I finished college
Oh,
before I moved to Iowa. And I had to manage these people who knew much more than me and were wiser. And we worked through a transformation. We went from 3 months toothpaste cycles to like 3 hour cycles. So we had to go through a massive transformation to do everything just in time. So I think it's the combination of growing up, surviving, overcoming adversity, and working in a job that was way over my head. I was completely horrible, but learning how to run a transformation despite like me not being ready made me stretch and made me learn what it was to take a team through a transformation, and making it work. Yeah, by then I was 23, but feeling like 39, right? These 2 years. But I think those two experiences gives you skills, right? To imagine a different future and then just making your way there.
wow, fascinating. Because there's so much discussion about grit. There's so much discussion about resilience and the need to be able to. But a lot of times you don't see it in action. You hear about these as sort of buzzwords. But in your story, I mean, I think that's what really stands out to me is that the application of that. You're seeing that you took sort of your life experience and really applied it. So how do you even communicate? How do you build a strategy and get the respect that you need in that situation?
So for a long time, I don't think the team respected me. I actually think they felt sorry for me, the little girl, the little Chinese girl from California. And they kept asking me about China and Korea and Japan. And I'm like, I'm from the ghetto of Los Angeles. I don't know anything about those things. But over time, I actually learned, right, how to earn people's respect and how to leverage their skills, their knowledge, because they definitely knew more than I did. They had more life experience than I did. But I learned how to bring out the best in others, and I had to learn how to lead. I had no choice, either that or go home. Right?
Yeah.
But I didn't see my mom ever quitting, right? So, what am I to complain about? So I just had to stretch and learn, right? And force my way through. So I think when something bad happens, you can either let it drag you down or you can figure out a way out, right? How to work right through it instead of, just letting it drag you down and it killing you, right? So that's one of the skills.
Fantastic. Well, what are some people, I mean, you described that experience, but were there some people further along in your career who either, really opened a door for you or gave you opportunities or were just, very not helpful and gave you feedback? Like I had a boss early on who told me I was a pleaser. And it wasn't a very pleasant conversation, but it was really helpful because it was like, oh, she's right. And I stopped sort of being a pleaser and having that be my North Star, right? Which was really helpful, even though I hated her at the time. But I would love to hear about, folks in your life or along the path.
Yeah. So I've had some phenomenal leaders. And so they gave me tons of feedback. I always had a lot of feedback because I was so rough out of the ghetto coming into any of my jobs. I was so unready. So I had a lot to learn. So I was also a pleaser, but I'm probably now a repellent. I probably went too far the other way. I also learned that it was not about me, right? It's about the team, right? Earning their respect and learning from them and figuring out things together. I'm not an island, right? And so I learned to plan with a team.
It's humbling,
I also,
though. I mean, what you just described
oh my God,
is really
it's
humbling, right?
humbling. My whole life has been humbling.
It's really self-aware to know you're not an island. I mean, you described it even in Iowa. You already knew that you needed to work with them to lift all of you, right?
Yeah, I was told by them that I knew nothing. And it was true. And so I had to learn, right?
You said you got a lot of great feedback from people along the way. Are you really good at taking feedback and really blunt at giving it? What can you tell me your secret? Because that's definitely something I struggle with.
It always feels bad when I hear feedback, but I always know there's a grain of truth. Because if people are gutsy enough to give me feedback, right? And then I ask them, when did they see me do this? Because perception's reality, right? I may have intended one thing, but if it comes off a different way, that's how they receive it. And so it opens up conversations, right? To understand each other. And what I learned about leading is I need to understand each one of my team. in order to see what drives them and how do we work together, right? So when you manage a team, it's managing a whole team and individuals. So no, I learned a lot, and I found that getting feedback was the fastest way to improve for me.
Wow.
I also took a lot of assessments, and I learned I had a lot of derailers. There's like 9 derailers, all kinds of stuff, like pleasing is one of the derailers, like avoiding risks, is another derailer. And I found out later on when I took this derailer test, I had 9 derailers. There were only 11. I had 9 derailers. And because so it's the other side, right? Your strengths, the other side of your strengths is a fatal flaw. So how do you leverage strengths without falling into the fatal flaw when you're really stressed, right? And how do you manage your stress so that you remain calm?
So what are some tools that you can share with us that you've learned?
Yeah. I learn how not to overreact when something really bad happens, because when you're running a startup, shit happens every hour. It's like every hour on the hour, like something else bad happens, and you learn to take your emotions out and just listen to the facts. And you problem solve together, because in a startup, you find out you may not get all the answers, but you still have to decide. You still have to move the team forward, right? You have to admit when you make a mistake, right? So, not overreact, gather facts, problem solve, get the war room going so you can gather more facts, right? And how do you make a decision?
Yeah. One of the things that I really, when, we've known each other for a while, one of the things that I always admired about you was your ability to create connection with your teams. Like, you were doing it before it was virtual, before, people were doing weird, like, arm's length show and tell and other little games that we do now on video. You were, taking your team out to a movie, or, having a day with a theme that there was a celebration. And I always really loved that and admired it. But I also, because it fundamentally addresses the fact that we're all human, that a workplace is just a community of people together, and you need to build those bonds. And I'm really concerned about what this virtual work is going to be like, particularly for our children, who may not ever have a face-to-face interaction with people. Like, they may start a new job and just be purely in their bedrooms and not build that sense of connection and community. I would love to hear, for you to share some examples with our audience of things that you did to build community, and some of the, why you thought it was important as a senior executive. I mean, you could have spent your time on a million other things, but you chose to make this a priority. And then some thoughts about how we can build community moving forward and ensure that people feel connected and don't just sort of drift off and, one job is equal to another job. They can easily just sort of move on if they don't feel a connection.
Because I only do startups or turnarounds, fixing broken departments, everything with a team is about a vision of a different future. And how do you, as a team, together move to make that future vision real? So it's a journey, and it's a journey together with a team. And so you have to be able to connect to each person and as a team as a whole, right? Because you're working together on this mission to achieve the impossible, to build something that's never been built before. So people need to understand the vision, but you also need to understand what makes each person tick, right? And bringing the team to understand each other, not only as workers, but as humans. So we used to do all kinds of things, right? When it was not so remote, I used to have family days where for Halloween, It started with my children, but I involved all the employees, right? And every year we make it so scary. You can see how the kids got braver year by year by year. The first year, they wouldn't even come out of the elevator because it's so scary. The second year, they'll open their eyes when they're going through the haunted house. The third year, they're like using their swords and chopping down my decorations, right? And so through the years, you watch them grow up. We also had Easter eggs, right? Easter at my house where we put Easter eggs all over. You know, when I lived at Four Seasons and here, right, everyone's looking for these Easter eggs. There's thousands of them everywhere and you win prizes and you do it as teams, right? Later on, I did a lot of sports competitions, but even during remote working, during COVID, we split everyone up into teams and set up competitions, but you post, you know, your team engagements and people would win different prizes, you know, so lots of different prizes. Who lost the most weight, who walked the most, who set up the best videos, who had the best chant, right? Who had the best team name. So you mix up the teams. I also built a lot of cross-functional teams.
And did you find that these natural sort of organic bonding experiences and team building experiences that were so authentically part of, I think even your teams pre CXA, but certainly at CXA, like did people value those? I mean, did it factor into their decisions to stay and how they engage and their longevity and stuff?
The people who worked for me the most worked for me in 4 different companies in Asia. I only worked for 4 companies in Asia. So they worked for me in all my different companies. And I watched them get engaged, right? Get married, have kids. Some got divorced. They got remarried. They had other kids, right? So yeah, I think so, because there's that connection.
Yeah. I would just ask for one piece of advice before we close for someone just launching their career. You know, you're 22, trying to figure out, you know, how to position yourself or what to do. What's one nugget that you can share with us?
I would say find the opportunity where you can learn the most.
Mm.
Right? I wanted a job where I could learn a lot, because you only learn a lot if you're being stretched. That's why I always believe in taking roles that are where I'm in over my head and I either drown or I drive, right? And so I force myself to learn. So find jobs where you think you can learn a lot, where there's someone you can learn from, or they put you in a program where you rotate through different areas and you learn from different areas. Because when you're 18, you don't really know what you want to do with some people do, but most people don't know what they want to do with their lives. So you just want to find a company that's known for training new people and, you know, as much as possible, be like a sponge and do as much as possible to learn, right? Because you want to figure out what to do with your life. So your first job, you just want to work so hard to impress the hell out of them, right? Because that's how you know what your limits are. You just want to be pushed.
Perfect. I think that's a great piece of advice. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your sharing. And thanks for joining us today on Liftoff.
Sure. Good luck to the
All
audience.
right.